If you've spent years trying to earn your parents' approval, what if I told you that the real work is not in fixing them, but rebuilding yourself? In this episode, we'll share some crucial steps to break free from those old patterns, set unshakable boundaries, and finally parent your kids or yourself the way you deserved all along. Hey parents, welcome to Fulfillment Therapy. Do you want to raise your kids better and have a stronger marriage? Are you up late at night researching marriage and parenting tools and self-care tips? Do you start each day hoping for deeper connections and less chaos, but it ends with family arguments and going 12 different directions again? My name's Kendra, wife, mom, therapist, and growth enthusiast. It wasn't until I discovered how to fulfill my unmet needs that I was finally able to show up as my best self as a spouse and parent. I realized that by meeting my needs, I could more fully meet the needs of my family with more energy and less resentment. In this podcast, I teach parents skills like boundary setting, prioritizing personal needs, communication, and claiming ownership. Just like my clients, you'll be shocked by the improvement in your marriage, parenting, and personal life when you focus on fulfilling your important unmet needs. Ready to prioritize yourself so you can quit mentally throat punching people? Then grab those earbuds and head outside, and let's rock and talk. Welcome back to Fulfillment Therapy. I'm your host, Kendra Nielsen, and today we're discussing a topic that hits close to home for many of us, and that is emotionally immature parents. We're going to be exploring some eye-opening insights from Lindsay Gibson's book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, that I've been reading for a while and talking about with many of my clients. Today, we're going to discuss how to heal and grow when you've been raised by parents who might not have had the emotional toolbox to support you fully in the way that you wanted and craved. I want to start things off with a story. I love stories. They help us apply it to ourselves and help us remember. This is a story of a client I had a while ago who I'll call Ashley, and she always had this nagging feeling that something was off with her mom, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Like, you know, those moments when you share something really important and your parent just doesn't quite get it. Well, that was an everyday reality with Ashley. Her mom would brush off her feelings with classic lines that were something like, "Oh, you're being too sensitive," or "Oh, you'll get over it." Her mom was full of contradictions. For example, one moment she'd be so overly involved in her life and micromanaging things and wanting to have a say in her choices and her appearance. And then the next, she'd be completely emotionally distant and seemed uninterested in Ashley's thoughts or her feelings. And this was normal for Ashley. This is what she experienced most of her life. So that unpredictable behavior of her mom left her constantly on edge because she was never sure which version of her mom she'd get. And her mom's need for attention often meant that family conversations just revolved around her, and there was little room for Ashley's experiences or her emotions. And it wasn't until Ashley stumbled upon this book, even before I did, that light bulb moment happened, where suddenly those puzzle pieces of her childhood started to fit together. And she started to understand the impact of her mom's emotional immaturity on her own development and self-esteem. So I want you to think about that story and maybe apply it to yourself. Like, do you think maybe one of your parents or caregivers might be a little more emotionally immature? And this is not so much a judgment call, but also culturally, that's kind of what happened. The past few generations didn't focus nearly as much on emotions, and they've prided themselves on shoving them or not talking about them. So we see this often because generationally, people haven't had their emotional needs or even other needs met for quite some time. Now, it doesn't mean there's not great parents out there, but this is something where they didn't know what they didn't know. So what does an emotionally immature parent look like? I want to break it down very simply for you. First and foremost, it's all about them. These parents often put their needs at the front and center and sometimes forget about the other people in the room. And if that's you, that can be really hurtful. They have very little empathy and they struggle to understand or even validate your feelings and emotions. They're also very hot and cold. So one day they're completely over involved in your life, and then the next they're missing in action, and you just never know what you're going to get. Now, this affects us obviously as children, but it messes with us as adults too. When you grow up with emotionally immature parents, it can leave some lasting marks that you might not have considered before. It's like having an emotional neglect hangover. So you might struggle with self worth or feel like your emotions are always on this roller coaster. And if you need more background, I'd really encourage you to read that book, and I'll put that in the show notes too. There's also these relationship woes that keep popping up. So, forming and keeping healthy relationships can feel almost impossible because you didn't have it modeled very well for you growing up. There's also that doubt monster, and you might be wondering what that is. Well, that's that little voice in your head that's constantly having you second guess every decision you make. And that is a souvenir from an emotionally immature upbringing, one that we wished we did not have. So, do you find yourself second guessing every decision you make? Or do you feel like you're often on an emotional roller coaster or struggling to form and keep those healthy relationships? Dr. Nicola Pera says this: children of emotionally immature parents often become parentified, taking on adult responsibilities at a young age. And I see this a lot in my clients. Those that caretake excessively and worry about others, often when we break it down, they did have emotionally immature parents and they grew up way too quickly. I want to talk about another client, Emma, and this might sound familiar to you with her experience. She found that she was constantly seeking approval from everyone around her and mirroring what that was like as a child, always seeking her mom's approval, whether that's through straight A's or high performance in different areas from, let's say, violin to whatever it might be, school throughout decades. And always seeking that approval and that validation and that acknowledgement, but very rarely getting it. When we can recognize these behaviors, it's like putting on glasses for the first time, and suddenly everything makes more sense and it comes into focus. Let's talk about a few more of those patterns. Maybe there's a pattern in your life of your emotions getting dismissed very quickly. Or maybe you feel like the parent in relationships, especially with your parent, and you're always worrying about their well being, and you realize it's not a typical parent child relationship, and it really never has been. Likely your parent does everything they can to avoid those deep conversations. One of my clients talked about how his emotionally immature mother would do this. As soon as he would get serious about something, his mom would very quickly change the subject just as things were starting to get real and more in depth. And he realized it wasn't just her being scatterbrained, but it was emotional avoidance. And it had been going on for years, but he just never picked up on it. So now that you know a little bit more about it, that 101 version of it, what do we do about it? Well, there's 4 simple things you can start to heal. The first one is just simply get to know yourself. Start paying attention to how your upbringing shows up in your life now. And it's not simply to just stay that victim, but to validate your experience, especially because it wasn't validated for you growing up, and to grow in that compassion for yourself so that you can move forward. When we try to shortchange that and not give ourselves those needed things like validation and self compassion and that unconditional love, it is very hard to heal and it often stays stuck. And that's what I see with a lot of my clients. The second thing is to remember that feelings are friends, not foes, despite how it was modeled for us growing up. And we can learn to acknowledge and accept our emotions because they are valid no matter what our emotionally immature parent might have taught us growing up. The third thing you can do is draw your lines in the sand. so much harder for most of my clients than it sounds. And that just means setting some healthy boundaries with your parent and remembering that it's okay to say no. I have one client right now that, for the first time, realizing that her mother is not as amazing as she thought, even though she's a wonderful human. But often that relationship has complicated her life and even harmed her marriage. And now that she's seeing these things, she's ready to set more of those boundaries, even though that's such unfamiliar ground. And her mother very much fights her on those boundaries. But we're practicing how to say no. We're practicing standing up for herself and being assertive. And often that requires role playing, even writing down a script, saying it several times, and then acting it out. Like, this is so foreign for my clients. And that change doesn't happen overnight. So maybe getting a therapist might be your first step. And finally, number 4 is to just remember that you are not alone. Again, find therapy or a support group. Read books on it. Sometimes you just need some backup, especially when this has affected your life for so long and you're only now beginning to see just how much it has affected your life and your relationships. One therapist, Nedra Tawwab, says this: healing from childhood emotional neglect involves learning to prioritize your own needs and feelings. Again, that sounds so simple, right? But I know firsthand that it is not easy to prioritize your needs and your feelings. There's a lot of shame and guilt that comes up with that, especially when you learned from an early age to be a people pleaser, to help others instead of tune into your own needs and your feelings and them be validated and accepted. So if this is you, consider going to therapy. Therapy often helps, but there's also other things you can do, like journaling and group sessions, like I mentioned. It is not easy, but as we do these things, it's easier to learn to set boundaries and to process the things that have happened to us and explore how it continues to show up in our life. So if you are a parent going through this, here is how you can start to break that cycle. Tune into your emotions, pay attention to what you're feeling and why. Remember quality over quantity with your kids. So make that time real, have meaningful chats with your kids. And then, last but not least, be that example. Show your kids that it's okay to have feelings and to talk about them. We really try to do that in our home, and that has really helped to normalize feelings, and it also helps them process it and move forward. Another one of my clients realized that he was turning into an emotionally distant dad and decided to mix things up a little bit. So he started having daily feeling check ins with his kids when we talked about this. And he created that safe space to talk about what's going on and to normalize those feelings, even though it wasn't something that he was accustomed to in his own culture growing up. So I want to circle back to Ashley from the very beginning. So her journey was this healing that was a gradual process, like it is for many of us. And it started for her with setting boundaries. So that first time that Ashley told her mom she needed time alone, it felt so difficult, but also huge for her. And despite her mom guilt tripping her, she stood firm. And with help and some role playing and therapy, Ashley uncovered this deep rooted self doubt and this habit of downplaying her achievements. And one day in therapy, a breakthrough came when she finally stood up for herself with her career choices at dinner with her mom. And it really surprised her and her mom. She started to become more confident in the process as she leaned into that and practiced that more often. What really surprised her as she did this is that her relationship not only with her mom improved, but all of her relationships improved because she became more open, set more boundaries, and started to trust her judgment instead of relying on everyone else for approval. So obviously there were some setbacks, but she learned to be patient with herself in that process. I would say in that situation, one of the most unexpected changes was Ashley's relationship with her mom. As she became more secure, she had more compassion for her mom and started to have more empathy for her experience, the reason that she was emotionally immature. They did not become best friends, but they found this new way of connecting. She learned to accept her mom without changing her, meeting her where she's at, while protecting her own well-being at the same time. So, in this example, it shows us that healing from an emotionally immature upbringing is about those small steps towards self awareness and those healthier connections. Remember, my friends, this is by no means a sprint. It's more like a marathon with some scenic detours. Be patient with yourself along this journey because it is so worthwhile, especially when you feel empowered and you take those first few steps and you're able to say no more or confront them more, even though it fills you with dread thinking about it right now. Think about how it will feel afterwards if you are able to start doing that more regularly. And my clients often find it's not as terrible as they expected. And it's a little bit addicting once you start to see that it's not as terrible as you imagine it might be. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you for tuning into Fulfillment Therapy. If you think this episode would help somebody else, maybe someone that has an emotionally immature parent, share this episode, post it on social media, whatever you can do, get the word out so that we can help others live a more fulfilled life. Until next time, this is Kendra Nielsen reminding you that fulfillment starts with understanding yourself and showing yourself some unconditional love and compassion. Lean in, my friends. I'll see you back here in just a few days. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, chances are someone else would too. Would you take 30 seconds to share this with a friend who's looking for greater family fulfillment? And while you're sharing, tell me what you think about the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It refuels me when I hear this podcast is helping you. No matter what your house or your hair looks like, I'll meet you back here every Monday and Thursday morning for more episodes. Until then.